3. A live podcast sponsored by the Marin Fire History Group. All about the history of the fire service in Marin County, California. And now your host, retired Fire Chief Bill Lellis.
Good day, and welcome to the Marin County's historical website. Producer and director today is the one and only Dan White. We are broadcasting from his studios at Share the Vision. What happened in this country at the turn of the century is it was happening all over the little villages here in Marin County also. And that was going from steam, horse-drawn hand pumpers to a power internal combustion fire engine. The fire service has not changed that much. Here is an image of a pump that was developed by a gentleman by the name of Nero, and it was developed 2 centuries BC. So you can see that we change, but again, we don't change. No matter what century we're talking about, the one thing that excites both children and adults is the sight of a fire engine rumbling or roaring down the street near you. There is no other vehicle on the highway that excites people more than a fire truck. We have to go back in our own history to determine where we are today. And of course, here we have a hand pumper with a bucket brigade filling up the tub, as it was called, and the gooseneck, a nozzle, which was also given credit to Nero in 2 centuries BC. So it's quite an image that we should be familiar with. The bucket brigade is probably the first manual piece of equipment that we had. In the early American history, it was required by law that everyone have a minimum of 1 3-gallon bucket, normally made of leather, full outside their home. In the event of a fire, the people running to put out the fire would grab your bucket full of water, and they would start extinguishing the fire. The one thing you want to keep in mind with these buckets is they're 3 gallons. If it was full completely, it would weigh over 25 pounds. And imagine yourself how far up or onto a building can you throw a 25-pound gallon of water. It was mostly to defend the fire from spreading to the neighbors. In those days, they actually had keys that would take the bed apart and salvage the bed and other pieces of the equipment. The bucket brigade was mostly a confine and not to extinguish. One of the first manual pieces of equipment that still is very romantic is our hose cart. The average hose cart could carry 1,000 feet of 2.5-inch cotton hose. They could be drawn by horses, or in most cases were manually pulled. This hand cart would take probably at least 8 to 12 people to pull to a fire in a community. In the old days, this was a very romantic and exciting time. Anytime the communities would meet for parades or celebrations, there was always going to be hose cart competition amongst the various fire departments. And in most cases, what it would be that they would run 100 yards. They'd have 12 people pulling the hose cart. 2 guys would hang back. They would grab the hydrant. They would continue with the hose cart to a particular line, attach the nozzle that you can see on the tongue of this thing, and apply water. And a good time to run 100 yards with the hose on the hydrant, flowing water, was like 25 seconds. That's an incredible time. But they would practice this as volunteers for the competition, and in the event of a fire, they were very efficient at putting out fires at this time. The chemical wagon came about next. It was the most logical thing. And here we see the Larkspur Volunteer Firemen pulling their first single-cylinder tank. And it was quite common to see them on a Saturday training running up and down the muddy roads of Larkspur and the community. This was a common sight in all of the communities throughout the county. The next logical thing the fire service would do, if one tank would do it, let's go with two tanks. So here we have a two-cylinder tank. You can see it's very large. The wheels alone are 5 feet tall. The weight of just the cylinders filled with water and soda acid is over 1,000 pounds. That's not counting the weight of the wagon, the hose that's in the basket up above. So to pull a 1,000 or 1,200 pound vehicle, and keep in mind the roads were muddy and rutty, and in most cases these vehicles or these wagons would be pulled a number of miles to fire. This particular fire wagon you look at now was pulled to the San Quentin when the jute mill fire, and so this is 120 gallons of soda acid extinguishing agent with a 200-foot, 3/4-inch hose line. This is the most romantic time in our fire service history. The steam pumper, the powerful, smoking, belching fire as it goes down the street, being pulled by three beautiful white horses. The only problem with that is one of those secrets that they would start the boilers in the station. They would have kindling in the fireplace. As they were leaving the station, they were ignited so that the boilers would be up and running with pressure by the time they reached the fire. But to do that, the fire would throw up sparks. So it was quite common that the steam pumper started more fires probably than they put out. But we don't talk about that. But this is a beautiful sight to see something like that running down, and you can see how that would excite any child and or adult. Today we're going to talk about the first motorization, and it'll be involving chemicals. Now we're talking from 40, 60, 80 horsepower engines. Brand new, 1900 was the start of the internal combustion engine. Europe and France was a little ahead of us, but in the 1880s. So here we have the series of chemical engines in Marin County, and a soda acid, 2.5 gallon soda acid. So we have the Ross engine, the assembly room, the San Anselmo engine, the chemical horses being pulled in San Anselmo, and the Mill Valley engine, which we will cover each one of them separately. Chemical firefighting made its appearance in the 1880s. It was the first piece of firefighter equipment that required little or no manual labor. Invented in 1880, they mixed sodium bicarbonate in 2.5 gallons of water and 4 ounces of sulfuric acid in a glass bottle with a lid. They would invert the cylinder. The acid would mix with the bicarbonate water, and they operate to 25 pounds. The chemical solution created a pressure of 130 pounds per square inch and would propel the stream 30 to 40 feet onto a fire, and it would normally last about a minute and a half, 90 seconds. So that was our first introduction to lack of manual labor to put out a fire. Here we have the soda acid, typical soda acid fire extinguisher. When I came into the fire service in the 50s, it was quite common that we, in the fire service, we refilled all the extinguishers ourselves. We had the soda acid, we had the bicarbonate soda, we would mix it, go back to the station. This is before the state fire marshal stepped in and required to be licensed to service. These fire extinguishers were pretty much outlawed in the 1960s because they couldn't withstand the pressure test that was required of them, and operators were getting hurt very badly, and in some cases they lost their lives when the cylinder erupted. So these were outlawed. These are more collector's items in today's marketplace. But they were very popular. Like everything else, the advertisers ran wild, selling their product that they could do everything but put out fire. So this is quite common to see the cylinders, two-cylinder manual that we have already seen. Here is San Anselmo's two horses pulling their chemical engine, and the horses are called Major and Colonel, and they went into retirement when San Anselmo purchased its first motorized chemical engine. They were so popular throughout the country that the fire service fell in love with the chemical engine. You could drive to the fire, it would carry 5, 6, 8 people, get there, and you could, 2 tanks, 1 tank operating. When that was empty, you would fill it while the second tank went into action. So again, they sold like hot fire, and chemical engines were in service up until probably into the 1930s. There's always a question in history in the fire service, who came first, who did it, but it's pretty well agreed that the Knox Automobile Company of Springfield, Massachusetts, in 1906, delivered its first motorized chemical fire wagon with 2 35-gallon tanks to the Springfield Fire Department. That same year, Watrous Engine Company of St. Paul, Minnesota, they delivered a motorized engine to Wayne, Pennsylvania, also in 1906. So if you're going to give out a gold medal, you'd have to give out 2 to the first in our history. Here we have the Ross engine, 1910, the first motorized piece of apparatus in Marin County. And I think this is probably one of the first motorized apparatus on the West Coast. There's some debate about that, but this engine cost, in 1910, it cost $5,500. That was a lot of money at that time. It was so popular that the Ross engine was used in a national West Coast advertising showing their engine. And you can see how most of our engines in this time were put together with kits. Seagraves, which this is the engine made by them, would send parts out to Oakland, where the Gorman Engineering and Fire Apparatus Company would assemble the engine for Ross. There was a company in San Anselmo that did Larkspurs and San Anselmo engines, but this was quite a piece. So in the early 1900s, the Gorman Engine Company, Oakland, California, they turned out to be the ideal for adopting to fire pumps, collaborating with Seagraves, who shipped their bodies from Ohio to Oakland for pump and motor installations. Seagrave Gorman pump generated up to 1,300 gallons per minute. The first centrifugal pump built for fire service in the nation was by this company. And the centrifugal pump was quickly followed to chemical and positive displacement engines. Here we have San Rafael with their engine, and the top one is showing the San Rafael engine off on one side, but it's most important to see the engine on the bottom one with the chemical engines with the adapters and the hose, and you can see a number of people could ride on these little engines. They produced about 60 horsepower at the time, and that was and the speed limit was the fire chiefs across the country tried to limit the speed limit of these motorized apparatus to not to exceed 25 miles per hour. San Anselmo was the next engine to come by, and this they're carrying the sulfuric acid and the bicarbonate of soda to be used once the tanks are emptied and stirred. Larkspur came next in 1916. Larkspur had its first Model T. This is a Ford Model T kit bought from Henry Ford, again assembled in San Anselmo. And what you'll notice on the back of the engine, the cylinders you have, looks like a steering wheel, and the wheel was to spin inside the cylinder to mix the bicarbonate of soda so you wouldn't get caking, and the caking would block up the nozzle. So it was very important. Also, you can see between the tanks what appears to be a 2.5-inch pipe inlet. So if you did have hydrant pressure in the area, the engineer could connect to the hydrant, get unlimited water to the booster reel also, and keep the cylinders full much quicker. Everyone had to use chain tires in those days because the roads were so rough and muddy probably half the year. If you didn't have chains, you probably were not going to make it to the fire. This engine was sold and went to Kentfield, and Kentfield had its first chemical engine when they purchased Larkspur's 1916 and 1923. Mill Valley. Here we have the Mill Valley first fire engine, chemical engine. This was made by a company in San Francisco called DiMartini, who made mostly vehicles for the military, but they also did make for Sausalito's first motorized piece of equipment was a DiMartini truck with a cab. As you'll notice, our first history, there are no cab overs. And I was always told when I asked the question, how come we didn't have cabs? People would say, well, the officer could stand up and look and find the fire and direct the men. But we no longer have, everybody has, no more open cabs are pretty much outlawed. Corte Madera built its first chemical engine in 1915. It's a single tank made by Pope Hodford out of Connecticut and assembled locally, probably in the city. But this was purchased by the citizens of Corte Madera. It cost $400, and that was quite a deal at the time. Belvedere, this is a Willys apparatus. Belvedere is a nice shot of the extra cylinders on the running board, the steering paddles to keep the solution in a 2.5-inch inlet going up to the hose reel for refilling and applying water. This is the Dyerscher and Laforge blacksmith shop at the hub in San Anselmo. This company shipped apparatus all over the world, and as I said earlier, they, to my knowledge, they assembled the Model T from Larkspur and the White from San Anselmo. That building is still there today. If you drive by it before you get to the gas station, after you turn on the hub, it sits back off the street about probably 60 feet, but one of the original buildings is still in existence at the site that this was built. The chemical wagon was so popular that the U.S. Postal Service put out a stamp advertising the new zip code protocol. But this is an engine going to San Angelo, Texas. It had it's a Aaron Fox engine. This is the front mount. Aaron Fox had the front mount pumps and cylinders, so air chambers. They're a very attractive engine, but they're the only one that I know of that actually put their pump on the front instead midship. It carried a single 40-gallon soda acid. Again, very popular. Advertisers said these chemical engines could do everything, and in this case, you can see they're saying that their chemical engine is 40% better than plain water, which is not the fact. It turns out that the soda acid had the same extinguishing power as plain water, but had no pressure. The thing was, when you mix the bicarbonate with the sulfuric acid, you had 130 pounds of pressure, and you could apply it on a fire. And that was the benefit of it. There were surveys made by the manufacturers and asked all the cities around the country how many fires their chemical engines put out. And in many cases, for example, San Francisco claimed that 50% of all their fires were put out with their chemical engines. And some say as far as 80. So if you only had one, like most of us in the county, you could probably say, yeah, 80% of our fires were put out by a chemical engine. But, so we were in love with these engines, and they're going to be hard to replace. Now we made the big step from chemical to what we call the triple combination pump. This is a 1928 American LaFrance. It pumped 1,000 gallons a minute. It's what we called, us old timers would call that now it's referred to as a Class B engine. And I'll explain that in a minute, what the Class B and a Class A engine is. This engine in Larkspur, you may have seen it, was sold to a Red Garter band and used to drive around Candlestick Park at 49er games. So you may have seen that if you were a 49er fan. This was the engine that the Red Garter band played on and drove around Candlestick Park. So this is a Class B engine. Here's two Class A engines. And we do not refer to them as A and B anymore. Just old timers like myself can say that's a Class A or a Class B. And all it means that a Class B, when engines first came out, the American Engine Association tried to come up with some testing procedures. So they in those days, you had to pump the maximum capacity of water, say 1,000 gallons per minute. You had to pump that at 120 pounds per square inch. And then as the power plants became bigger and bigger, and the new engines came up pumping close to 15 to 2,000 gallons per minute, like these two engines in Larkspur, they would have to pump their capacity at 150 psi. So they would be an A engine. So the A to B is only used to guys like myself who are historically minded. But so when you look at the panel on an old engine, it'll say 120 or 150. That'll tell you it's an A or B engine. But again, it's just a historical term that we talk about. So what's in the future? This is called big wind. This is used in the oil fields of the Middle East. It can move 8,000 gallons per minute. It's an engine on top of a tank. This is two jet engines that can travel the speed of be twice the speed of sound. It has 27,000 pounds of thrust. It is an exceptional piece of equipment. Was developed after Hussein set all the oil wells on fire. It was developed for that purpose. Here's a case where an oil fire rig was on fire, and the big wind extinguished that fire in less than 20 seconds. 20 seconds on oil fire, and then they could go in and cap it. So that's a future that the fire service came up with for a particular problem, fires on oil rigs. So it'll be on sale on eBay anytime soon. Here's a neat piece of apparatus. This little robot can flow 600 gallons a minute, can travel at 18 miles an hour, and can go into areas that you wouldn't want fire service personnel to go. It's developed in Europe, and I would assume in some time in the future we're going to see something like this in America. This is the up and coming, this is the eye in the sky, a drone that we are using now in the fire service, and probably will become in the wildland side of the fire suppression, is going to become just a tool like everything else that we carry. This is without a doubt. An incident commander has available one of these to look at, can see where the fire is and where the fire is going, and look for that last spark. So drones are here, they're new, and they're coming big time. So this is kind of the history of motorization in Marin County, how we came, where we came from, how it worked, and then we moved on to what the triple combination Class A and B pumps are all about. A AAA carries water, a pump, and hose. That's what a triple combination pump does. Want to thank you for taking the time to look in on us. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. This is Bill Lellis signing off. And before we leave the air, let's talk about, we got some questions that people want to ask. And our director is going to ask the question, and we'll see if we can answer it. Dan.
Yes, oh, great one. Karnak, here you are. The first question comes from a viewer, Larry, in Tiburon. He wanted to know how long it took to restore the Stutz fire engine.
The Stutz that Larry is speaking about is the San Rafael engine that was in service in San Rafael. And then, like everything else, it came as a chemical engine, and was slowly, the chemicals were removed, and a midship pump was put in it. And then, like everything else, it gets old, and they don't know what to do with it, so they sell it to a rancher or farmer someplace who needs some type of protection for his facility far away from any fire service. The engine was actually found by a battalion chief, retired battalion chief out of San Rafael, a gentleman by the name of Don Wolford. And they knew that the fire chief at the time, Bob Marcucci, was interested in maybe obtaining it. So Chief Marcucci went down and looked at it with his brother Marty, who are both in the video you may have seen. And they took it and brought it home, and it sat almost 20 years in a garage in San Anselmo. And they had to make up their minds. Are they going to fix it or get rid of it? They decided to fix it. 5 years later, Marty and Bob Marcucci restored this beautiful, beautiful engine to the day it came, like the day it came off the Indianapolis plant. It's gorgeous. I hope you enjoyed that tape. If you haven't seen it, go back onto our archives blogs and take a look at it. It's gorgeous. Mr. Director, producer, what's our next
Sir, we
question?
have another question. Searching out your wisdom today. Clint from Fairfax. Clint writes, I have an old alarm box number 411. What was the location of that box in Fairfax?
As I told Clint, that it wasn't a Fairfax box. Fairfax only went up to box number 52, but at the neighboring community, San Anselmo, did have a 411 box. And my apologies for reading, I could not read the name, the card that we put on the blog. Was all I know, that box was near a bridge in San Anselmo. The street name we can't discuss, so I'll take the hit for that. And if we can find the street, next broadcast will tell you that street name, but it was near a bridge.
I'm just trying to think back to San Anselmo days, Bill. There was Bridge Street, which is downtown, and that had a bridge over the creek. Saunders Avenue up by Drake High School also had a bridge over the creek.
Yeah.
And I don't know if others did Sayus or Calumet? I don't know. I'm digressing.
Yeah.
Let's press on.
Well, don't strain yourself. I know you're hurting over there.
It is.
We will find it out.
And I have to read the next question.
We have another question.
I have thought you'd never asked.
Boy,
I do have
kind of
another
windy
one.
today, like
Yes.
big wind.
Kathy from Novato wants to know what department had the first paramedics.
A point of interest and controversy. When the paramedic issue, after the celebrated television show, two departments in the county were being trained at the same time down at Stanford. There was the Marin County Fire Department out of Woodacre and the Novato Fire Protection District out of Novato. They were both being, and the only reason we say that Marin County was the first, they were the first ones to be recognized by the Marin County Health Service and responded. It probably was days or maybe a couple weeks that Novato got their certification to go, but Marin County has, they have a paramedic that has license number 1. And Dan, that name of that paramedic was?
I think it was, honestly, it was Chris Busher from Marin County Fire.
A gentleman by the name of Chris Busher, who's now retired, I'm told, but he holds the title of Paramedic 1 in Marin County. And Any more questions on the smart one?
No, sir. Oh, purveyor of wisdom. That's it for today, but a very, very interesting program. On your screen is our email